Well, the title says it all. Between efficiency pressure and regulatory tasks, there are two developments that have a great effect on the pharmaceutical industry. On the one hand, the requirements concerning quality and safety are increasing by authorities, and on the other hand, the efficiency and cost pressure are growing due to many reasons. Is that a millstone between companies are being crushed, or can we reconcile those two challenges that in the end it's profitable? That's something we'd like to talk about in the next minutes with two very interesting experts. I would like to welcome Dr. Michael Atzer. He's Head of Engineering Healthcare at Biotechnology Service GmbH. Your division forms the technical backbone at Bayer, at least in healthcare. And you're also a member of the DACH Committee of International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering for 25 years, also active in different positions that concern that field, inland and abroad. And one of your expertise, the biotechnology. Looking forward to talking to you. Dr. Thomas Zimmer, you're European management of the ISPE, and you're also CEO and Managing Director as CSCTIS Consulting. Before, for more than 30 years at Boehringer Ingelheim, also in many different positions in inland and abroad. You're also active in different panels, and you know the technical and the regulations worldwide. Thank you very much for being here. So we don't get tangled up, I would first like to talk about the regulations and the requirements here. After that, look at the efficiency and cost pressure, and at last, talk about possible solutions. So first, regulations. Those are increasing and getting more stricter worldwide. What is the reason for that? The reason for that is the increased demand for safety and effectiveness and quality for pharmaceuticals in general. That's a worldwide trend. How do you experience in your daily work this increased requirements? What effect does it have? Those increased requirements are not only from the authorities, but also from internal investigators. And we want to be proactive and react to those things, but we also want to, in the overall process flow, we want to offer this quality end to end and address the subject. We have different markets. I would like to see worldwide how it looks. For example, how do the established markets decide when it comes to regulations, and how is it different to the far emerging markets that are getting more important? Well, there is two regulation regions that are decisive for development. This is the FDA in the USA, and on the other hand, it's the Europeans, the plural, because in Europe it's a very split environment of healthcare authorities. It's not a central authority, one we have in London, but it doesn't do inspections. We have a lot of national authorities. There's more than hundreds that do inspections. So there's a conflict between the regulations and those who write them, and on the other hand, those who later investigate. If we have a look at the established markets and stay here, this is the European market and also the US market. They're one of the most decisive markets. How is it different when it comes to regulation policies of the FDA on the one hand and the EMA on the other? There's not much difference. The requirements are very similar and can be compared. The difference lies in the interest of the inspectors, where they put the focus. The FDA inspections are focused more on documents. Meanwhile, the Europeans also focus on going into the plants and looking at processes. But they're about the same. The authorities also exchange information. So the overall system has a very close cooperation. But there are still differences, maybe in detail, sometimes even bigger. How do you react at Bayer? Do you have one answer orientating at the strictest requirements, or are there more than one answer depending on the market and production side. At Bayer, we have a global quality system, and that is valid worldwide. And this quality system is always adapted, and there is close cooperation with the different authorities regarding inspections or technical congresses and exchange to see that in this quality system we're always up to date and fulfill the requirements. Of course, depending on the authorities, there are different aspects and they put a different focus on things. But in general, those requirements of the different authorities are very similar and comparable. The requirements all focus on the production process, but also on approval of pharmaceuticals and active ingredients. How will that change in the future? We just talked about national structured system. Also, approval is something that's dealt with in Europe on the national basis. How will that change? That's right. We have about 80 to 85% of all approvals at national authorities, and about 15 or up to 20% are those central approved products. So they're being approved in London for the whole European Union and registers there. But I would also like something to what Mr. Arzt said when it comes to regulations. Of course, they're unified due to the pressure of international supply chains. You can't have 3 standards as a company. So you have to try to build up a quality system that it can fulfill the requirements of all markets. Of course, there might be difference when it comes to inspections, and that's right. Let's stay with this topic of approval. Life licensing will be a subject in the future. What is that? And how will that have an effect? That's a process has a lot of steps, and the main element in this life licensing is the so-called quality by design. That means that beforehand they set out parameters where quality has to focus on. With the hope, it's connected that knowing your product better, and then in production you have some kind of playground, but within a predefined framework. No production goes in line, it has fluctuations. And that's a measurement to secure quality on the long run. Of course, you're right that we're trying to cooperate in early stage with the authorities for products and pharmaceuticals to talk with the authorities, how can the process look, what do we have to keep in mind, so that at the end, when it comes to approval, that there is no more surprises for authorities, and rather have a look at the process at early stage up to the final approval. And that's very important that you have this contact with the authorities on a regular basis. We're also trying to, during research process, get information through process analytics to have more data for the scale-up. That's something we'll talk about later when we talk about quality management. The reason why, or one reason why the requirements from the authorities are increasing is that the substances are getting more potent and more dangerous. What requirements are there regarding safety? Quality management has more than one aspect. It starts with the training of staff, and here there have to be very targeted programs to offer the staff the opportunity to find sensibility for the whole topic. And it's very similar to the airplane industry that also has a global quality management. That's an industry where we can learn from to build up all those things globally and then also fulfill them globally. Because it can't be that in South America we have different requirements and demand different requirements than here in Germany or in the USA. So the industry has to also adapt to investing more in risk management. Yes, that's a very important aspect in quality systems, that at different steps you have to be aware of the risks, and there are processes how you can identify those risks and how we can mediate those risks? You just said it, the different stages, you already mentioned it before. You have to see it over the complete supply chain and secure it there. The process is getting more complex, not only production process, but the overall process is getting more complicated. Does that mean that we have to build up more partnerships and do more planning from an early point? Yes, that's a very important topic. If you want to have a global pharmaceutical supply chain, if you have a look at that, it can have up to 50 stages. So you have many stakeholders. They have the responsibility for a pharmaceutical gets from the plant to the customer safely, and that's a very big challenge. For example, false pharmaceuticals is a big topic, so pharmaceuticals that look like the original, but they aren't. That can be very dangerous when taking the pill. For example, active ingredients can be missing or even hazardous ingredients, and people can die. Or think about the internet, a supply chain that is not secure. So we're warning to not buy pharmaceuticals online. What are you doing to protect yourself from those cases? We have internally different audits that are part of the life cycle of the product and are continuously making the staff aware where are the deficits, what can be improved. And those audits, it's not only the authority audits, but also those internal audits that safeguard that quality is kept and that the concepts are realized. Some experts expect that development costs will grow to an all-time high. Also that time to market hour will get longer. Can you confirm that? It depends. It depends on the product. Those highly effective ingredients, it might be the case. Meanwhile, less risky products, here it's different. We're already at the topic of efficiency because everything goes hand in hand. We can't really separate those different topics. But for example, if we talk about time, on the one hand, this is due to regulations, but also has a big part of efficiency and competitiveness, not only when it comes to time to market, but also when it comes to product changeover or refitting, but also when it comes to time in which a company has exclusivity of a pharmaceutical due to generic products or expiring patents or competitive products or even new product groups. What does that mean, Mr. Zimmer, Dr. Zimmer? What does it mean for the companies if the exclusivity period is getting shorter? If you also think about efficiency and cost, that means that the pressure on development time is increasing. So we expect less time-worthy development times to have less time for patent. How can we make that time shorter? There are a lot of opportunities. For example, the topic of biotechnology. We're trying to, through minimizing reactors, building them up very small, and to save development times here. That's one example. If you have smaller approaches, you can implement more. Another example is, if we look into computer technology, there are simulation processes, computer-based simulations, that based on analysis can simulate processes, and authorities accept that. You can save a lot of time and a lot of money through that. We're already at a technical and solution topic. That's something we'll talk about in a minute in detail. Also what those things mean. But first of all, I would like to stay with the question, the time of exclusivity. So it means if I today, as a manufacturer, develop a pharmaceutical, it's more and more important to know what I can expect from that pharmaceutical, what profit can I get, especially when I have less time of exclusivity. How are you trying to predict that better in the future? What kind of profitability a pharmaceutical will bring with it? all pharmaceuticals in the clinical phase are being tested. That means that you have 3 different clinical phases. The first one takes place with healthy members, the second one with patients that are suffering from that illness, and the third phase is the big trial, and all those data are being combined and are analyzed. What are the side effects of a pharmaceutical, and they're trying to define a really clear profile and characteristics of a pharmaceutical, how they react in your body, because that has, if we look at important consequences of doctors, if they're administering certain pharmaceuticals, they have to be aware about the side effects and how to react to those. How do you see the development in the pharmaceutical industry? Will they focus on those products that are very profitable at the end? Pharmaceutical development is very expensive. And of course, they have to be refinanced on the pharmaceutical manufacturer. But there's also social responsibility for society. And that means that you also have to invest in developments that are only for a small group, for seldom illness. That's my next question. Are there not maybe some patients left behind who have an illness that's not interested for the manufacturers? No, worldwide you find a lot of cooperation of companies that are sharing the costs for those researchers. So there's a lot being done, especially the healthcare organizations also focusing on the fact that those patients are not left behind. You just said that of course it's being tried in the clinical phase to find that information and data, but the trend is going, those are patients who accept it and they know they're being part of a trial and a study and are giving up their data. But the trend is going towards pharmaceutical companies trying to generate data beyond that, because that's real cash money. So what about data protection? And there's overlapping between cost pressure and regulations. Data protection is a very big subject. That's a very important topic. And after the clinical phase, when the pharmaceutical is coming into the market, you're trying to get data from the patients. And they're trying to find that through questionnaires that they're allowed to, or that if they want to fill them out and get that information directly from the patient. And this information is anonymous, so the data cannot be retraced to a certain patient. But data protection is a very important topic, and you have to be aware of that, what you're doing and how you're dealing with it. Is there enough to be done, Dr. Zimmer? No. A very clear no. Here there's still room for improvement. There's a lot to be done. The technical solutions are available. It's not like we don't know how to do it. And you can see that at the Bundesregierung that we're hacked, even though parts of the Bundesregierung are very safe. Absolutely. That the requirements that come from the companies, the monetary requirements are getting money in. On the other hand, the payers, not only the authorities, the insurances, those who are paying for the pharmaceuticals, they want more and more know whether a new pharmaceutical, if I have to pay for it, is it more effective than the pharmaceutical before? And that's more and more the focus. What does that mean for the industry? Well, one development that we're observing is the so-called, well, the pharmaceuticals are being developed for very special illnesses or for very special patients, like customized pharmaceuticals, that there's this broad range of pharmaceuticals that are needed by many people, or also pharmaceuticals targeted to a very special tumor and treat that special tumor. And that's a new development that they're trying to develop pharmaceuticals that are able to treat a very special illness or a very special characteristic of a patient and addresses those topics, and that's a new tendency. And in the next years, we'll have to see how the development advances, because the consequence is that during development of pharmaceuticals, patients, those have to be developed, customized, addressed to a patient, and those are new development processes, and they might not be as profitable. We have to think how to deal with those topics. Process is something we'll talk about later. One question before, many experts expect that the payers will have more to say and have more power. Is that something you can confirm? Is that something you expect? That's already the case today. In the countries of the developed countries, the mature markets, we have commissions that measure the stage of innovation, and according to that, the prices are applied. So there is not really a free market. It's really partially regulated, depending on what those panels find out. There's also very heated debates. If we talk about possible solutions, how to leave that triangle, we mentioned it before. There may be some technical solutions who, at the same quality stage, can produce more efficiently. One answer might be continuous production in comparison to batch production that is still used in pharmaceutical industry compared to other branches. They're still behind. Is that maybe one possible solution? Yes, that could be a possible solution. But we have to say that it always depends. If I have a very big product, then continuous manufacturing makes sense. But if I have very smaller scale products and I have to change the machines, then it's getting more difficult, because those different processes have to be harmonized. They have to all have the same pace, so there's no buffering or jams. So it really depends. Another problem is that the overall quality system is based on the batch term. That means that I'm responsible and I'm safe from here to here. But for example, if I do continuous manufacturing, where does the batch start and where does it end? I can say, yes, I have a time, for example, the Monday batch or the Tuesday batch, but then I have the problem that if one batch has an error, where did the error occur? The day before, the week before? So there is a bigger risk. I believe that's also one reason why the industry is still a little bit careful to switch, that the regulation authorities are looking really into when they're switching the production process, which still complies with the regulations, whether there's new regulations needed. What experience did you make? If we look at the production process, if you're switching them, you also have to register for a new license, which is a very elaborate work. So they're trying to get the production phase at a very early stage and define it, and to build up the switch, how the process has to go on. For example, if we talked about continuous processing, if that for a certain pharmaceutical is the production chosen, it has to be from A to Z and has to integrate the process in such a way to the authorities. And we're not free to, within production of a pharmaceutical, to change the way we produce, or only with a very elaborate work. So it's very important that with development we choose the manufacturing process. That will get more complex, of course. What about automation? Would that be a possible answer for securing the quality? Automation means also control, permanent control. Also the human factor who can do errors getting smaller. Would that be a possible answer that would fit to the regulations but also efficiency? That could be one answer. For example, process analytics, the so-called PAT. That's a very important tool to safeguard quality throughout the process and define it, and also to test quality. And especially in continuous processing, this continuous process and evaluation of quality is very important, because if you go from one stage to the next continuous stage, you have to make sure that the quality after process step 1 is safeguarded and is ready for the second stage. So, very important aspect. And automation, of course, takes the risk factor person out, because the humans are one of the biggest risks, and that's something we have to say. Automation, there's some alarms going off, because that means less jobs. For the companies, it might be a positive message. Do we have to maybe see that in the future we need less staff? Possibly in production, yeah. But in the support area, for example, quality, supply chain, I don't see that, because the demands and requirements when mentoring what we're doing has to be safeguarded, and it has to be at a higher level. For example, in the IT division, we're generating, during those very intensive controls, a lot of data information that have to be processed and controlled. There have to be people who analyze all this information. We don't really see much if we have such a big data cloud where people working in that field, statistics, can see something. Though in other areas there's more work. Let's stick to technical solutions, something we mentioned before. Could there be a key in modular technology and microprocesses? Well, the modular technology is defined differently, but what we want to reach is a high flexibility that could be good for competitive advantage. A very great working of the plans and very fast changeover. So the change from one product to the next on the same plant has to be as fast as possible. And those are concepts that we have to keep in mind to be profitable. High flexibility means at the end that you're faster. Another trend that is prevailing more and more is the virtual engineering, the computer-based simulation of the complete process. Could that be a possible solution? Those simulation technologies are more taking place in development, that they're simulating how a pharmaceutical will react within the body, even before the clinical phase, that you have a high simulation possibility done and know how the pharmaceutical, how the active ingredient will react within the body. The clinical phases that are very elaborate and include many patients, to keep this phase shorter, and also the number of members, because through simulation technology you get a lot of information already. That requires high qualifications of people who are working here. We talked about process analytics getting more important, that it's getting the complex processes have to be more efficient planning beforehand. What does it mean for qualification? Is the staff there who can do all that? Yes, we have them. And I would like to add one aspect, that a pharmaceutical has to be registered. A pharmaceutical has to be registered. So that means that on the one hand is the manufacturer who has documents, on the other hand are the experts at the authorities who have to understand those documents. And those innovations have to be understood. Something that's offered as safe, they have to test whether this is true. And therefore, we need a lot of know-hows on both sides, those filing the documents, but also those who have to evaluate the documents. And that requires high qualities to talk with each other. It's not only a science topic, but it's also a communication topic. Of course, there has to be a different cooperation with science, with other partners that have to be included into the process than before. Yes, that's right. Before you talked about jobs. There's a trend towards another expertise, to high qualified staff who are trained way differently than 10 or 15 years ago, the normal operator at a machine or a process. But now we have to have higher expertise and who also need an insight into the own cooperation. So there's need for transparency and also networks, which means the experts have to talk. They have to have a platform to talk with each other, and those platforms, the authorities have to be invited as well, so there is an understanding between each other. Normally, the authorities don't really have experience in the practical side of the industry. He normally doesn't know how to incorporate those regulations. And there are platforms, ISPE for example, where there's regular meetings and talks. When it comes to know-how protection, if I have to be more transparent for that cooperation to be effective, how can I protect my knowledge in the future? That's a very good question, and I have a very simple answer to that. Easy answers are always good. Safety is not a competitive topic. What is your answer? How do you protect your know-how? IP protection is, for the companies, a very important factor, also when it comes to profitability, and we try to protect them because those processes are very specialized, and the decisive steps, they're trying to build up systems to protect this intellectual property as much as possible. There is no 100% protection there, of course, but we can create them to an extent that it gets very, very difficult for third parties to get that information. And keep in mind that behind those processes, there is a lot of information and experience before we talked about clinical tests. And all these data and information have to be generated first, also from an external company. And that means a lot of work. And that itself is already a protection, some kind of protection. For the final round, I would like to ask one more question for each, and you may add anything that you feel is important. Dr. Azor, what is, in your opinion, the most important task of the pharmaceutical industry concerning the conflict of regulations and safeguarding quality and safety and efficiency pressure and cost pressure on the other side? I can summarize that in one sentence. You have to make sure that production capacities can be available in a reasonable time and be very profitable. And you may not forget that the delivery has to be safeguarded, not only from the monetary side, but also for the manufacturer who has to supply the pharmaceuticals for the patient. That's a very important aspect, and the companies have set that as a goal to safeguard this delivery. Dr. Zimmer, is the industry well equipped for those increased requirements, or maybe will there just be left some new big pharmaceutical giants? Those who set the right focus in their strategies will survive. Small or big is not important. If you put your focus on know-how and innovation, you will see that there is no trade-off or no conflict in goals between high security and quality and profitability on the other side. If you understand what you're doing, it will get easier. Dr. Zimmer, Dr. Azor, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge here today. Thank you very much. And we could have asked another questions to discuss, but I hope that we gave you a good impression and overview in this very interesting topic. And I hope that you, despite that cost pressure, don't forget about the patient and environment. So good luck with that. Make us healthy and enjoy the rest of your day.